welcome. Looks like you're all awake, and I hope you stay that way. We have the exciting conclusion of Jacob's journey tonight. And I hope this does what I intended to do, is to further illustrate what we're trying to teach and talk about these 3 days. So let's get back into Jacob's journey. We're picking up in the same section called Walking Through Shadows. We left Jacob. He was having various weekly meetings with Aaron. And this is as a result of him getting to the point in his struggles that he just couldn't handle it anymore. So he went to his pastor, Pastor Felix, talked with him about it. Felix brought it up to his ministry team. They discussed it. They discussed various options for Jacob, but they settled on having him join one of the church's accountability groups. So they did that. Jacob thought about it. He agreed to do it, so he joined the group. And it wasn't long as he explained what his situation was, the group made a decision that it would be better for him to meet privately with Aaron, one of the group members, and then go one-on-one for a while as needed. And so they have been meeting at some point regularly, and we left the story kind of mid-story there as Aaron and Jacob are meeting. And we're going to pick that up now with the next meeting. And it happens to be in an accountability group meeting. So he's still meeting in the accountability group, but he's meeting individually with Aaron. So he still goes to the regular group meetings. So this is called In the Circle of Support. It's time for another accountability group meeting at the church. Jacob attends it, entering with new confidence and a sense of belonging. Each member, including Jacob, participates in the meeting. And they do what's called a check-in. Now, we didn't explain that before, but most meetings, they have what they call a check-in. And it's where they share their personal story, what events of the week. And I want to just give you a little bit of detail on what a check-in is. It's actually a thing. And various accountability groups use it. It's described in the Accountability Group Survival Manual as one of the actions that they do. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but here's basically the process. The captain of the team leader, the group leader, determines the focus of the check-in and how much time each person has. So there's a certain number of people in the group, and he decides how much time they want to take, and so he decides how much time each person is going to get when they speak. So they start somewhere in the group, somebody starts, and the person to the left of the first person to be speaking is the timekeeper. So we've got the person speaking, and the person to the left of them is the timekeeper. So the captain decides how much time, and so let's just say for this example, it's 5 minutes. So the timekeeper sets a timer for the designated amount of time, and the person to speak starts speaking. He's got 5 minutes. So he shares what he wants to share. Now, as he begins, he tells the group how they are to respond to what he says. He can ask them to just listen. He can ask them to listen and pray for him, or they can listen and give counsel. But it's up to the speaker, the person checking in, decides what kind of response he wants from the group. So the timekeeper raises his hand when the time is up, and then the process is repeated around the circle. Now, and a final step here is, and I forgot to mention this, when the person is checking in and the timekeeper is keeping time, and it shifts to the next person. Now the timekeeper is the one who speaks, but he's got 5 minutes, the same amount of time, to repeat back to the group what he heard the person say. Now, he doesn't have to take the whole 5 minutes, neither does the other person, and they also have the opportunity to skip. If they don't want to say anything, they don't have to, it goes to the next person. So that's basically what a check-in is. And I thought it was, when I learned about it, I didn't dream this up. It's a thing that, it's out there and people do it. I've not experienced it, but it sounds kind of intriguing to me. So anyway, that's what they do in this group. So Jacob, who previously hesitated in these settings, speaks with a steadiness. He reflects on the progress he's been made through the sessions with Aaron, particularly regarding understanding the connections between his past and his present. When Jacob shares, Aaron listens quietly, giving Jacob space to articulate his thoughts. The other group members offer their support and encouragement, growing the safe environment Jacob senses in the group. This kind of group dynamic allows Jacob not only to receive support, but also to contribute to the group. With other members sharing their experiences, this gives Jacob a sense of connection with the others in their struggles. The group's care for each other provides a strong support system. Remember, Jacob is very timid. It's really hard for him to share anything. So for them in a group to get to a point where he feels comfortable to share a little bit about other people's things, that's a significant step forward for him. So as the meeting concludes, the participants leave with a reinforced sense of connection and mutual support. For Jacob, the group has become a vital part of his journey, offering a support network that complements his individual work with Aaron. So he departs feeling grateful for the sense of brotherhood that he's found in this group. But life is up and down, so it's down for Jacob, navigating setbacks. During their next meeting, Jacob discusses a recent setback with Aaron. In a park setting, Jacob appeared more serious than usual, troubled by an incident that had reignited his fear of divine judgment. Aaron, sensitive to Jacob's mood, inquired carefully about the cause of this distress. Jacob's voice trembled slightly as he began. Aaron, it was something so trivial, yet it shook me. I was at the grocery store in a hurry to get back home. At the checkout, I accidentally dropped a few coins while paying. The cashier smiled and said it was okay, but the lady behind me sighed audibly. That impatient sigh. It felt like a thunderclap of judgment to me. All the way home, my mind was in turmoil. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I kept replaying the incident, each time magnifying its significance. The lady's sigh echoed in my head, transforming it into condemnation. I felt as if that sigh wasn't just about me dropping the coins, but a judgment of who I am. My heart raced with the absurd fear that this minor clumsiness was a reflection of my moral failing, a sign of my unworthiness. It's absurd, I know, but in that moment, I felt like it was a divine rebuke, as if God himself was expressing disappointment in me. Jacob looked down, his hands clasped tightly. In these small moments, Aaron, they become overwhelming. It's these that become overwhelming. They ignite a fear deep within me, a fear that I'm constantly being judged, not just by people around me, but God as well. Aaron listened as Jacob expressed his frustration and disappointment about how quickly his fears resurfaced, realizing the depth of his internal struggle. In voicing his fears, though, Jacob found some relief, suggesting to him that understanding and living with these fears might be more achievable than completely eradicating them. Aaron offered assurance in framing the setback as a reality of life, and that they will continue to work together on this. He carefully reminded Jacob that he should try to look at it as a learning experience and a natural part of growth. He encouraged Jacob to record his thoughts and feelings during such moments of fear in his journal to gain better insights into his reactions. And Aaron was so understanding of the event that Jacob felt encouraged. Aaron's guidance and the perspective gained from discussing his fears actually helped him move forward. So here's kind of like a deep dip, but the process of sharing it with Aaron helped him climb back out of it. And I think it wasn't just that, but all of what has built up over the time, the meetings and so forth. In a moment of weakness, it happened, but you can see here that something is building in Jacob that he can climb back out of it more quickly. Next meeting, reframing fear. In the next meeting, Jacob and Aaron had a more intense meeting, focusing on reframing Jacob's deep-seated, irrational fear of divine judgment. Aaron wanted to help Jacob understand how his fears affected his perception of God. Jacob admitted to often viewing God as a strict judge, a contrast to the forgiving and loving deity described in the Bible. This contradiction caused him much internal conflict and distress. So Aaron gently questioned how these fears aligned with the message of grace, love, and redemption in the gospel. This promoted Jacob to realize that these fears were more about his insecurities than the actual truth of the gospel. Recognizing this misalignment, Jacob tried to see God in a different light, more as a patient, understanding father than a harsh judge. Aaron suggested an exercise for Jacob to search into Bible passages emphasizing God's mercy and grace, aiming to harmonize his views with the biblical teachings on God's character. Then he was to record in his journal the passages he found, including the reference, and then copying the entire text of the passage, and finally writing comments about it, including what it meant to him and how he interpreted it, and how it differed from his panic views. This meeting lasted longer than some of their meetings. They had a long discussion of the meaning of the actions Jesus took as a man, what his death on the cross really meant, his resurrection, and a number of other basic doctrines of Christ. These were not new to Jacob, but somehow he had not been able to personalize them for himself. This meeting marked a turning point for Jacob as he began to actively challenge his long-held misconceptions and align his beliefs with the compassionate aspects of the gospel. Aaron's guidance played a crucial role in this shift, helping Jacob navigate his fears and embrace a better understanding of Jesus' role in his life. Embracing grace. Jacob and Aaron continue the meetings and take some time this time to look at Jacob's reflections on Bible passages from the homework last week. Jacob shares how these scriptures challenged his assumptions about God's nature and his relationship with divine judgment, contrasting the fear and condemnation he has internalized with the scriptures passage or messages of grace and forgiveness. Aaron prompts Jacob to consider how these insights affect his feelings of fear and unworthiness. Jacob responds with a sense of relief and shift in perception. He's beginning to view his relationship with God through a lens of love and acceptance rather than fear and judgment. He realizes that he's been holding on to an incorrect view of God despite knowing the truth in his mind. He recognizes God's invitation to be loved and accepted as he is through Christ's forgiveness. This understanding begins to transform him. Aaron suggests a new homework assignment for Jacob. He's to write a personal letter to himself from the perspective of a forgiving God, helping him further internalize this perspective of grace and forgiveness. And as they conclude for the evening, Jacob leaves feeling like he's getting better equipped with new tools to navigate his path. Now, this time, we're back to the accountability group. Sharing in the circle. Oscar was absent from this night's accountability group meeting, but all of the remaining members knew well enough how they normally conduct the meeting. Aaron filled in for Oscar. They followed their normal check-in part of the meeting, and all of them took turns sharing their experiences. When Jacob's turn came, he confidently spoke about his recent meetings with Aaron, discussing how he's been processing his past and how it affected his understanding of God and his grace. The group attentively listened to Jacob's progress. Aaron quietly supported Jacob while he shared his story. The other group members responded with encouragement and shared their insights, continuing the environment of empathy and brotherhood. So this meeting represented another step for Jacob. He felt uplifted not only by the support he received, but also by the support he could offer others. So he's starting to pitch in a little bit in the meetings. He's starting to contribute some, as we mentioned before. So let's talk about just a couple quick questions here about, as we close this chapter, so to speak, the Walking Through Shadows, where the individual groups with Aaron and the accountability group meetings, he's made some progress. He's gotten somewhere with this. So my question is to you, based on what you've heard so far up to now, you've had 2 days of this seminar, heard a fair amount, you haven't heard it all yet, but how well do you think Aaron is doing in his role as helping Jacob, in the counseling practices that he's using? How well is he doing from what you're hearing? Good, fair, poor?
Well, if nothing else, just the fact that Jacob's continuing on is success.
Yeah.
Measure of success there. So Aaron has to do something.
Yeah. I don't have a right answer. I thought I'd ask you that. Let's move on. Finding light. This is part 4. This is where we get to the climax of the story. Jacob seems to be turning a corner in his struggle. In this final part of the story, we see Jacob getting a grasp on some key truths. These truths tie things together for him in a way that illuminates his way forward. Exploring the heart. In the church's quiet room, Jacob and Aaron meet again to explore the heart model this time. Aaron has set up a whiteboard so that he could illustrate some of the concepts visually. He explains how the heart has the capacity for reason, desire, worship, and love. And it's these aspects that drive his behavior rather than his external circumstances. He emphasizes that worship, in the context of the human heart, is about valuing and desiring something strongly. Aaron repeats this idea a couple times, showing how the heart responds to circumstances based on the desires that it has. The things desired most determine what is important to the person. It's those things that are important to the heart that determine how a person acts, rather than the circumstances they experience. That's what Jesus meant when he said, it's from within, out of a person's heart, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, wickedness, deceit, lustful desires, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. Jacob, intrigued by this new perspective, listens as Aaron connects these concepts to daily life. Aaron challenges Jacob to consider how his desires shape his actions. This leads Jacob to reflect on his behaviors and fears in a new light, recognizing them as reflections of his deeper desires and what he actually worships. To deepen Jacob's understanding of this principle, Aaron assigns him to reflect and record in his journal desires that he has and try to recognize how they align or conflict with his understanding of the gospel. This exercise aims to help him discern the motivations behind his reactions. As they finish their meeting, Jacob leaves with a new framework with which to understand his experiences. The heart model provides him insights into how his own heart works, which helps him understand his various struggles. The meeting marks another step as he begins to view his challenges through the lens of his inner desires. The idolatry process. Again, Aaron has the whiteboard available for their discussion. In this meeting, Jacob and Aaron cover the concept of idolatry as a process, building on their previous discussion about the heart. He uses the whiteboard again to illustrate how desires can evolve into idolatry when they surpass God's desires. He explains that idolatry occurs when personal desires are prioritized above everything else, including God. Aaron's discussion of this concept pushes Jacob to reflect on it deeply, realizing the potential of desires to morph into idolatry, a perspective new to him from their last meeting. Aaron engages Jacob with probing questions, asking him to identify instances where personal desires might conflict with spiritual values and how this might influence his decision-making. They also discuss how desires like these could eventually alter one's core values. The meeting included a review of Jacob's homework from their last meeting. They examined Jacob's listed desires, contrasting them with gospel truths. This discussion helps Jacob see the discrepancies between his desires and his faith, offering him insights into his thought processes. As the meeting concludes, Aaron asks Jacob to try to apply the idolatry process model personally. This conversation leaves Jacob contemplating the ideas of the heart model and the idolatry process that they've just covered. And now that he's understanding this, they offer a new perspective through which he can view his experiences and responses. So this meeting adds another layer to Jacob's growing comprehension of himself. It adds a significant depth to understanding why he's been struggling so deeply with his fears. Unveiling personal motivators. As they meet again, Aaron and Jacob focus on uncovering more specifically the motivations behind Jacob's fears and desires. Aaron asks Jacob to identify his core desires and priorities, prompting him to reveal his deep-seated need for acceptance and his fear of failure, which he links to his longing for approval and perfection. Aaron listens attentively, guiding Jacob to realize how these desires influence his feelings about himself and his faith. He explains the impact of prioritizing personal desires over God's will, clarifying how such conflicts can lead him to feelings of guilt or inadequacy and even resentment toward God. Jacob's understanding grows as Aaron elaborates on aligning personal desires with God's purposes. Aaron stresses the fact that having desires isn't inherently wrong, but the key lies in harmonizing them with God's plans. This alignment, Aaron points out, brings peace and a deeper connection with God as it encourages trust in His will over personal desires. This is a lot. I mean, there's a lot packed into here, but we can see that somehow it's getting through to Aaron, because I'm summarizing what Aaron is spending time doing, maybe an hour and a half, trying to help Jacob connect these things, and I think it takes a number of iterations to get them to come together. So throughout this meeting, they discuss how Jacob's view of Jesus collides with his desires and his fears. So for homework, for the next meeting, Aaron asks Jacob to reflect on this more. Jacob leaves the meeting with more clarity. He was used to seeing them as isolated, but now he understands them as parts of a bigger picture of his life. This is both a challenge and a liberation for him. And the two things that he's bringing together is more clarity about how seeing desires, how they actually connect with his responses to life, like dropping coins in the grocery store. He didn't connect them. He knew they were there, but he didn't know how to bring them together, and that's what Aaron helped him do. Contemplating the path. After a number of more meetings with Jacob, Aaron sits alone with his notes spread out before him. Recognizing the significant strides Jacob has now made, Aaron's mind is focused on how best to guide Jacob toward a conclusion of their one-on-one meetings and continue with just the accountability group. He can see that Jacob is at a point of being able to handle himself better. He's better equipped and has the tools to use in handling his sensitivities more wisely. So Aaron is confident that the group will be good for him and decides to discuss this with Jacob the next time they meet and make plans for him to make the transition should Jacob agree. Final guidance and assignments. In this meeting, Aaron and Jacob review some key ideas from some previous homework. Through that homework, Jacob focused on how his desires and fears often collided with his view of Jesus. This discussion served to emphasize the lies he's really been acting on, as opposed to the truth that he knows but ignores. So Aaron wanted to reinforce these ideas for Jacob as he continues on his own. With that discussion, they both acknowledge that the progress Jacob has made. Aaron emphasizes that while significant progress has been made, some struggles might persist. He encourages Jacob to utilize the tools and insights gained during their meetings as he continues. Jacob thinks about the things that he's learned during their time together. Inside, Jacob is convinced of what Aaron already recognized, that the necessity of their frequent one-on-one meetings has come to an end. So they discuss Aaron's proposal to discontinue their meetings, and Jacob agrees. He did have a better sense of confidence to continue without them. And they agree to make this meeting their last one. Aaron was prepared for this and presents Jacob with two comprehensive assignments that he's prepared for him. And these are to be ongoing practices to be accomplished on his own as a means of continuing the growth process. When Jacob hears them, he recognizes the potential they have to guide his thinking. He's also comforted by the prospects of continuing with the accountability group and the support they will offer him. And he also knows that Aaron's in the group too, so that's helpful. But I also want to mention, I'm going to take the time to go through these two assignments, but they're in the book, or in the story. And they do provide Jacob with something to do on a regular basis, but it's something he can do for himself. So if you're curious, you can read it in the book. So this meeting concludes with a prayer. Jacob thanks God for Aaron's guidance and the changes in his own perspective. This last meeting marks a significant milestone in Jacob's life. Embracing brotherhood support. So as we close the story of Jacob's journey, the last scene is the familiar meeting room where the accountability group meets. The meeting begins with Aaron sharing the journey he and Jacob have undertaken together. He speaks of the progress Jacob has made and decisions to transition from their one-on-one meetings to more reliance on the support given by the group. Jacob then takes the opportunity to update the group on his progress personally. He speaks candidly about the challenge he's faced, the insights he's gained, and the growth he's experienced. His voice conveys gratitude both for Aaron's guidance and for the group's ongoing support. This group has been a pillar for me, Jacob says, and I look forward to continuing with you all. The group members respond with words of encouragement and commitment to support Jacob. The end. So, a couple of discussion questions, and then I'd we got plenty of time here. We can open it up for questions or comments if you have them. So just a couple questions here. As Aaron contemplates the end of formal meetings with Jacob, what does this contemplation reveal about a counselor's responsibilities in concluding a counselee's relationship, the counseling relationship? So in other words, what part does this play in the counselor's responsibility in counseling someone? What does it reveal? So one thing I might suggest is that the counselor realizes, and actually is part of its goal, that it isn't going to go on forever. It's not going to be a continual thing. Now, it doesn't mean that can't be appropriate in some situations. But considering Jacob's problem and their ability to communicate and discuss things, I think it should be a goal to eventually conclude. Hopefully that's the case. You don't want to conclude if there's no progress, but that's the goal, is to have progress. As we see the role of the accountability group in Jacob's continued growth, what does this suggest about the value of brotherhood support in the context of counseling? Well, I'm certainly no authority to say this is the way it should be. But if you read the book, I think some of the things that came out of some of the research that I did was that could be, and I think in some situations it is, basically it is a counseling environment designed for that, designed to be helpful, designed to know how to help someone with an issue, and centered on providing basically what a one-on-one could do, only in a small group setting. So I think that's going to vary as much as widely as people vary, from church to church, or from the dynamics of the group, who was in the group. But I think one thing I didn't mention in this short little story here is there's a lot of backstory that isn't given. And I think the backstory that's there is that this church took the initiative, the leadership took the initiative to get training for the whole church on how to do groups well. And beyond just knowing how to fellowship well or just be good detectives, actually implementing an environment that is maybe an expanded version of one-on-one counseling, discipleship, mentoring. So it's group mentoring rather than individual mentoring. So in this particular story, I wanted to trace that path, particularly just to introduce accountability groups and another view that we could have for them. I realized it was a little bit of a jog in the path, and it might have been, maybe if the ministry had been, they could have thought of another possibility and just jumped in and merged him up with Aaron. But I did it on purpose, because I wanted to throw that in. I wanted to mix it in, that there's appropriate place for accountability groups and there's appropriate place for discipleship and mentoring in church. That was the point of this, all in the church environment, to kind of portray a vision for what it can be like. I think the point is that the group can be more active, more involved, more connected, and accomplish more than just screening or just checkup. There's a lot a group can do. There's a lot of things, and that's what I wanted to try to just give a taste of. Now, a whole another story could be written on how the group works and how that, and actually in the book there is a little bit of a case study in there as well to illustrate how it could work. But you could adjust these however you want, and there's principles that make them work, or there's principles that make them not work, and it's good to recognize those. I would say that in answer to that question, an accountability group is important. Maybe that's the answer I was trying to get. Do you have any other comments or thoughts? I realize this is a really simplistic story, and happily ever after, but in the time it takes, I wanted to just, the point was not really to illustrate how to handle sensitivity, but it's how, just to give a picture of how this can work together. How this, all this stuff you're learning and you're getting overfilled with lots of stuff, but you can go home and digest it, and then how to actually put it together in something practical and useful. That's the idea. Well, I'm not sure I would frame it that way. I'm not sure I'd be able to say that such and such. Maybe it isn't. But I would say it has a lot to do with the dynamics of the group, meaning the personalities of the people in there, the culture, the mindset. That would have a lot to do with how the group works together. And I'm not sure, I just couldn't say that there's one particular thing that a group would do better. I think they both have places. And they both can be valuable. And I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. Does that answer your question? I guess I couldn't say it should be. There's any particular type that we would be better for. But I think I would say this, that perhaps it would be good if we could start thinking that way, that groups can be more productive, more useful, more helpful in a church setting than I think maybe they have been. I don't know all your situations. I just know what I've experienced and what I've heard, and I don't say it's 100% good. There's some people have some bad experiences with accountability groups. Now, I don't know what they're like, but I just want to portray the fact that I think they can be better. I don't think they necessarily guaranteed that they will be, because there's so many variables that go into a group. In each particular group, the personalities of the 3, 4, 5 individuals in the group are going to make a big difference as to how one group operates versus another one. And that's what I was trying to portray in this story in the beginning. When the ministry, when they decided on an accountability group, I think they kind of knew some of the dynamics of the different groups in the church, and they picked one that they felt would be better for him in his particular issue. So, I mean, this is an ideal world, but so take that. But sometimes we can derive things and make them useful in our crippled world from an ideal and shoot for it. I think that's what we're doing in trying to be like Christ, isn't it? We're shooting for the ideal. We're trying to achieve it, but are we ever going to actually make it? Not 100%, but I think it can be an upward climb. I don't see anybody's head on the table, so congratulations, you did it. Thank you. God bless.